Hey y'all, what's up? It's Dan. Sorry for my long-term absence, but I'll be having a video on that later. But I figured I'd just get right into a video for you guys, and this is probably the most common question that I've gotten over the last, I'd say probably 4 or 5 months. For those just getting into Darkest Dungeon, or maybe they heard about Darkest Dungeon 2, and they're just starting Darkest Dungeon, or they're struggling or transitioning from to like Champion Dungeons, and looking for some advice. So, what I'll start with is this is based around my playstyle, but these are what I feel are some of the strongest trinkets in Darkest Dungeon that apply to everyone. So they're not class dependent, they're not necessarily tied to a specific type of character, whether it's healing, whether it's damage or DPS. These are trinkets that you can use for almost everybody, and they're very strong early to mid game, and a few are actually still consistently used by me in week 400 plus. So what I wanted to do is kind of go through here and give you an idea of when to buy trinkets and what you're looking for, as far as if these are in there, there's some you want to really strongly consider purchasing. So what I first tell you is a big mistake that people make is it's so many questions like, why am I out of money? And one of the first things they do early game is they're like, oh, we got this nomad wagon. My guys don't have any trinkets. Let's buy something. And they just buy whatever. Your gold is so important early game. That is one of the biggest mistakes that people buy. So I would tell you, I don't think I've bought a trinket out of the nomad wagon, and I'm in like week 450 or 480. I don't even know anymore. What week are we in? 496. I may have bought one, maybe two in 500 weeks. So to give you an idea, you really don't need to use this all that much. The Nomad Wagon should be one of the last things you upgrade. Now, with that being said, there are a few trinkets that I do feel would be justified, and maybe I just got some strange RNG. So to keep the video kind of short, I'll hit on them rather quickly, but don't feel like you need to buy stuff out of the Nomad Wagon. That's one mistake that happens a lot. So what I'm going to do is run you through some of the trinkets that you probably want to consider or prioritize if your inventory is a little tight. So here we go. So these are general use trinkets. These are not restricted to any class. And what I did is I started with the common trinkets, and I only went up as high as the blue or the rare trinkets. The reason for that is the very rare trinkets tend to be significantly better, and there's a lot more to talk about there, but I was trying to keep the video short, trying to keep it towards early to mid game as far as the audience. And I was also really centering on things that you're going to be able to afford, rather than some of the very rare ones that later in the game are harder to get, or you'll see them in a dungeon. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to very rare, because you kind of want to alter the mission you're doing if you see some of those trinkets. So I excluded those just for the purposes of this video. So as we're looking, let's get into the list. So as far as common trinkets, I really think there's two that stand out for general use. Again, general use, and really focusing down on some that are extremely useful early to mid game. So snake oil is the first one I'm going to talk about. And the reason for it is stress is the one thing that costs you so much money early on, and time early on, that if you have a pretty good team, the snake oil is something that especially you can use on your very strong team to reduce the amount of stress that's coming in if you aren't able to camp at the end of the dungeons, like I suggest if you're able to in some of my content. So what my recommendation is, if you do see snake oil and it's early in the game, prioritize it if you do happen to see it in a Nomad Wagon. That 10% stress reduction can be a big deal when it comes to not only getting through the dungeon, but your repair costs afterwards. So that's one of the ones that early in the game, if I have this trinket, I run on as many people as I can. If I have 4 snake oil trinkets that go with me in every slot, they prioritize a slot. It's one of the ones that's the absolute best. The next one is the survival guide. So I talk a lot about my videos of the importance of scouting and how it allows you to, instead of reliant upon the RNG that's delivered to you, you can dictate where you're going to go throughout the dungeon. So what I mean by that is, if you have, let's say, a bounty hunter that's your scout, or another class that's stronger at scouting, by being able to scout and see what you're walking into, you're dictating to the game more than the game is dictating, or RNG is dictating to you. So you're able to kind of pick and choose your battles. You can reduce the amount of battles you have to get into and focus on the rooms that you want to get to and maybe things you want to avoid. So you have less battles, less RNG, less chance that you're going to run into things. You have curios that you're able to pick and choose what you want to go to. You're able to see the traps. So scouting is so strong. If not the strongest thing in the game next to healing, it's up there. So those are the two items that I'd say that if you see them, they're probably worth picking up. And there's a lot of honorable mention ones like that are just plus damage. But as we go into the list, what I would tell you is focus on avoiding things that are like virtue chance or death blow chance. If you're relying on a trinket to save you, you're doing something wrong. You really can't use those trinkets, and they're just going to hurt you. Virtue chance and death blow are nothing you want to really mess with. Now, there are some builds that do focus around there that are, you know, danger builds or whatever. People that run low torches that are going to incur more stress, that want to encourage that play style. There are some like that, but if you're a beginner and you're watching my stuff, that's not you. So that's what I would tell you about Virtue and Death Blow. Don't even look at those. But there's a lot of other common trinkets that are solid. Just for the video, I cut out the vast majority of them. So the next two are DPS related, or even the Camo Cloak here can be a healer related item, but 15 dodge if torch is above 75, you do lose some stun resistance. So the dodge, especially on characters that are more prone to have some dodge, like the Jester, that can be really strong early to mid game, especially as you will be able to out dodge a ton of attacks of people that don't have a high accuracy that are coming at you. I always recommend you run full torch anytime you can, especially if you're a newer player, but even if you want to mitigate the RNG that's delivered to you, run full torch at all times. Play it safe. The next one that we look at is the surgical gloves. These are, you know, obviously melee dependent, but they're some of the strongest uncommon trinkets that you can get. They do have minus move resist and minus debuff resist, but I'm not really looking at those, you know, negatives as a huge negative. Yeah, sure, move resist can be brutal, especially on a leper, but in general, they're one of the better trinkets you can get. They used to be much stronger. I have them in a previous list. They used to be a lot better, but they're still good. So, I mean, that's pretty obvious how you're going to use those. These next two, the Calming Crystal is, in my opinion, one of the best trinkets mid-game that you can have. Very much like Snake Oil. It's one that I would prioritize on the wagon if you see it, to mitigate some of that stress that's coming in and minimize your bills of going back and repairing stress if you're not going to dismiss those party members instead. So that's pretty self-explanatory. We then have Surgeon's Charm. Surgeon's Charm is, again, pretty obvious. You're going to use it on your healers, but it does give some healing benefit. If you don't have some of those class restrictive healing trinkets, it is one you can consider. But also keep in mind, this isn't one I put on here because I'm always going to buy it. It's not that great, but it is one you'd want to prioritize if you don't have a lot of trinkets for your healers. If you look at your healing skills, remember that as you're looking at the rounding that the game does, the values are truncated. And I'm not going to explain that just for the purposes of keeping the video short, but look up truncated values in the game's wiki and they'll kind of talk you through what that looks like. So 15% sounds like a lot when it comes to a healing skill, but it's not. Now when you come to getting hit with 60 stress, that's different, but when you're looking at healing 8, you may not get those numbers you're thinking of. So keep those in mind. The next two kind of coincide with what I talked about earlier, which is the Camouflage Cloak. So if you're running full torch, these are extremely strong because they don't have a lot of negatives. I mean, they do have that stress offput, but a lot of times the damage that you see or the dodge that you're acquiring or the prot that you see here are worth that offset of the plus 10% stress. These aren't must-buys like a couple of the others we talked about, but they're pretty strong. And if you do seem to be struggling for some good trinkets mid-game, these are things that if you run full torch that I would recommend looking into. The last one is probably my favorite trinket in the game. You guys have seen me if you watch my live streams on Twitch, if you've seen how I prioritize and how I set up a lot of my parties. This is one of my favorite trinkets and an absolute must-buy if you see it in the wagon. in the Nomad wagon. And the reason for it is speed is extremely crucial in the game. It allows you to be first to strike, and sometimes that means, for example, on a Hellion, if a Hellion strikes first and they can hit the 4th row, they happen to crit, they completely eliminated a turn that doesn't even go. So speed is really, really strong. In that same mindset, trinkets that have negative speed, I do tend to ignore unless they have a stress off put. Exhibit A, and it's only one. So anyway, dodge is again another really, really strong one. On the vast majority of my jesters early game, this is what they get. And they get that primarily because I am focusing on their quick speed, being able to heal stress if need be, and or buff the party quick so that they're first to move, and you're able to buff your party so that in our party's first turn, they hopefully are first to act with that buff that you hit with them, and they're able to have that additional benefit that is given by the Jester. So I know that's a quick video, but it is something that I feel would really help for all the questions I get about trinkets and what do I buy. Notice I only put like 10 trinkets in there, and most of them I said aren't must-buys, but you know, you look at a few of them, you're like, yeah, maybe I could buy that, maybe I can afford it. If you're super early in the game, the only one I would say would be a must-buy would be your Feather Crystal. If that pops up, I'd say you absolutely want to get it. And there's a lot of trinkets that are honorable mention that I didn't talk about just to keep the video short. So if you guys have some that work in your builds, throw them in the comments. Let everybody know what you do. Thanks again for your patience on the videos. I am going to be making a few more this week, so you should see some next week. And I'm going to focus on like a 10-minute, 12-minute video on Darkest Dungeon. So thanks for watching, y'all. I really appreciate your support. See you next time.